Alright, so now my sprite system. So again, implying the existence of an image manager, which I showed before, but here it is again. This is my header file for it, for creating, loading, unloading, and getting images, which is done through using textures. So yeah, just sampling the texture using that rectangle, and we're giving the image a name, and then that's how we get it through that map. And then of course the unload we already talked about in the asset managers. So this is my sprite header. So it has all the necessary stuff, all the necessary variables that we would need to keep track of in order to create the sprite first with the sprite image. And then making sure that we can also render it, set the position. I added getting the position, which will return a vector, setting the angle, getting the angle, and I talked about this before, but I added the angle measure type, radian or degrees, defaulting to radians just for extra usability, setting the scale factor using scaling by x and y, and getting the scale factor. And then setting the scale to exact pixels, so in screen space. And then setting the sensor. You could see all that stuff here. So for a sprite, we always use the cry model sprite and the cry model render, because they're always going to use that one. And then we get an image for a sprite, image sprite using the get image in the image manager. And then we create the graphics object sprite using the model, the shader object, the image, and then just the rectangle, setting up the rectangle for the sprites. And then we're making sure our matrices are good, so that we can then use them in the functions for when we're changing stuff. But render will allow us to call the graphics object render and go through the scene manager, get the camera, and eventually get to the current 2D camera, because we're using that orthographic camera to render this stuff. Setting the position will just let you set up the trans matrix using the x and y, of course, 1 for z, and then just setting the world once we're done doing the matrix multiplication. Getting position just returns the vector. Setting the angle. So we have our math tools, changing degrees to radians or radians to degrees, depending on which one we need for setting and getting the angle. But we just make sure that we have the right one, and then we're able to rotate do our z rotation matrix, or rotation about z, and then reconstruct the matrix and set the world again. Getting angle will just do radians to degrees, so that we can get either the radian or degree angle. Setting the scale factor, this is what allows us to set it by an x amount and by a y amount. And then scale pixel is by a width and a height, and it works in between each one, because this also calls set scale factor, so that if we're changing this, it'll change our scale factor, our sprite scale x and y, our scale factor by that sprite scales x and y appropriately, so that they can work independently of each other, and not give any unexpected results if you're using both. And setting setter is just setting the x and the y, which is important for especially important for this rotation stuff, or using the x and y. But that is pretty much it for its functions. For the for the actual image manager, I think I already talked about how we're using a string and then image pointer for our image map. And then I think I talked about the having that reference to cut down on the time. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So we use the asset keys. We had the internal calls to the managers for the new ones, the accessors and modifiers, the draw, and the destructor. It just deletes the graphic object sprite that we created in the constructor. Properly managed draw order. You saw it before, but how the draw 2D was called before the or after the draw 3D in our drawable manager. So associated documentation. If we want to see sprite stuff, just type in sprite. And then you can see all of our public member functions described, setting the scale factor, position. So yeah, just different stuff like that. Being able to link back to image manager when we want to. And here we have our image manager that we're showing. And that's pretty much it for the sprite documentation.